our next talk is what the AI revolution means for open source, open tech, and open societies. So please welcome our speaker, Jos.
Hello everybody. So I'm going to try this remote thing for the first time, so bear with me if I lose my notes and I need to run back up the stage. So this is going to be a far less technical talk than the previous one, which really went well above my head on this one. This one is much more, let me see, about well, how we as an open source community, more or less, at least from my perspective, should be approaching AI. So it's a little more, well, a part of it is a little more philosophical and around privacy, for example. Another part is a bit more practical about what we've done on the Nextcloud side of things. So my name is Jos Poortvliet. I'm co-founder of Nextcloud, built up the marketing team and are now doing communications. And so the subject for today, well, AI related of course, but I want to talk about how we work together over the internet, privacy implications of how we work. And of course, yeah, to some degree this is one of the fundamental challenges Nextcloud aims to fix. Privacy, security, and how we can get our work done without losing control over our data. And of course AI is essentially adding a whole new layer of problems to this already pretty problematic question. So I'm going to talk about, well, a little bit about Nextcloud, then a little bit about the AI side of things, and again, much of this is from a user perspective, not a AI data scientist like some of you might be. I'm not going extremely deep in the philosophical side either. I want to keep it a bit more practical because tomorrow there's a talk from my colleague Daphne. She's actually a researcher in AI ethics, so she can go way deeper in this subject. So the very specific ethical questions, you should also really consider going to her talk tomorrow. I'll have a slide at the end with the time and place for that. Then I'm going to describe our approach to AI, and I'm going to show some examples how we've done it. So I'm hoping this is also helpful if you're building a product and want to integrate AI, or are thinking about like, hey, I want to run some AI things locally and I want to see how, how I can integrate that in productivity tools, for example. So I think a key point that I find very important, but maybe I'm not on the same page with everyone on this, like at the moment we're moving towards a world, or maybe we're already in a world, where something like 5, 6 big tech companies pretty much control most of our important computing. I know you can run on pure open source, use a Raspberry Pi, but you'll still be emailing with Gmail and Hotmail and Outlook servers. You'll still be surfing the web over the infrastructure of just a few large tech companies. And yeah, I think that for society in general, that's a problem, and obviously for open source even more, because the big companies aren't always the best players in this space. So at Nextcloud we have built a collaboration platform. It's kind of a replacement for Microsoft 365 or for Google Workspace, where you can collaborate on your documents. It has pretty much a similar feature set. I don't want to say the same. There are things we do, they don't, and the other way around, of course. But it's completely open source. You can run it on your own server at home. So if you don't want to give your data to big tech, but you still want to have video calls and chat, you want to have document editing with other people, you want to be able to share files, you want to upload your photos from your phone, etc. All these things you can do with Nextcloud. So have a look. You'll see some examples mostly around AI later. But yeah, check it out if you're not familiar with it. And you can run it where you want, that being the point of it, of course. I mean, for us, Nextcloud is a mission, it's a goal. We work in an open, transparent way, open source. That's how we started the company and still do it. And so there are already millions of people using Nextcloud. There are about 400,000-ish. It's hard to measure, it's open source, people can run it themselves. But there is a bit under 500,000 servers on the internet that has it. And some of these servers have millions of users, others have just 2 or 1. I privately run a Nextcloud server, I have a test server, and our company has a server, so that's already 3. The company one has obviously a few more users than my private one. So lots of companies, governments use it, but at the same time it's built in an open way, as I said, with a community. We do a yearly conference, that's where this picture was taken, that's in Berlin. And yeah, it's a bottom-up project where anyone can get involved, which I think is really important. We try to do everything open, transparent, and independent. So we're not a venture capital run company. We really organically grew our company from, well, nothing to about 110 people today over the last 8 years already. I've given talks here before, so many of you might already have seen and followed our journey. It's been quite a crazy one. So let's talk about AI next. So in the last couple of years, we've introduced a bunch of AI features. And AI, well, initially it was very simple for us. We just, we added a feature where we trained a very simple neural network on login data from people. And this would then detect when if you normally log in every day from 9 to 5, 5 days a week from your office in, let's say Pasadena, and suddenly there's a login at 3 o'clock at night from Japan, there is something fishy going on. And so this would give a warning or could even block the login. And we would just very simply train a very simple neural network on this. Now, yeah, it's a neural network, but I mean, artificial intelligence is not a term I would really use for it. But hey, it's at least self-learning to some degree, so there's that. But it was just trained on your server, and it wasn't overly complicated. It was easy to see and understand. There was no data being sent to a third party. So, I don't know, we never really gave much thought to it. It was just a feature. We developed it, integrated it, shipped it, and that was it. Then later we added another feature. I have to quickly check out the slide, sorry. So we later added another feature, and this would check your emails. It would read basically, I think, the subject and to and from, date and times, I guess, too. And it would try to create a smart inbox so that it would try to predict, what emails you would be interested in reading. I think it would be trained on the data that you would star emails yourself. And then after a while, it would know what are important emails to you. Again, just run on your server. It wasn't really complicated. But then, of course, a couple of years ago, things started to get, well, a lot more interesting, right? We've all seen all the new challenges and opportunities that AI brings with, well, ChatGPT in particular suddenly became really hot again. And, I mean, there's a ton AI can do to make our lives easier, to simplify things, right? I mean, Steve Jobs once talked about the bicycle of the mind. I'm sure he didn't come up with it, but it's, I think, a really nice metaphor for how we are trying to use software, including AI, to just lighten the load, make our work a little bit easier and more efficient. So that's great, but at the same time, there are tons and tons of issues. There are reasons why companies like banks and Goldman Sachs and, tons of others are blocking their employees from using AI, because there is a massive new data leak opportunity there, where data is flowing, again, out of organizations and, of course, from individuals to the big tech companies that are, well, using it to train new AIs. I mean, just imagine you're, car company, let's say, I don't know, Tesla, and you want to design a new car, and because the AI that you're using for this has previously been trained on conversations happening at Chrysler headquarters, you get some nice tips and ideas from there that perhaps you shouldn't have been given access to in the first place. There are opportunities for data leaks with AI. Yeah, AI doesn't literally contain all the data it's been trained on, sure, but it does contain, a distilled version of it in some ways, and that can be a problem. And that includes private data. I think we've all read the articles about how private data can be extracted from ChatGPT and other big language models. They do have information in there. Also a ton of fake information, right? That's another problem here. I mean, all the issues with social media, the upcoming elections, I don't need to tell, I think most of you, what the risks are with AI there. So AI has tons of opportunities, but really tons and tons of downsides. So, well, you can say, well, then I will not do any AI. I don't want to get anywhere near it. And of course, we all know, unless you're going to live in the middle of nowhere, that's not really an option. First of all, if you're a company or an individual who's looking for a job, you're going to have to use AI simply to compete with other companies that do. Otherwise, you're just going to be left on the side. Well, unless of course you manage to do some handicraft that you can stay far away from this. But honestly, a lot of us don't have that option anymore. I don't know about you, but I live in tech these days. So you kind of have to get along. It's the same for individuals. So I think the opportunities are big, and it warrants putting in effort, time and energy, and go for this. At a previous presentation, I asked people for some ideas on things you can do with AI, and I thought it was nice to, put these on a slide, basically. I see they're all going to come one by one. That's great. Gives me some swiping experience here. But there are tons of things, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff LLMs are good at. Yes, they hallucinate stuff, but they're pretty good at summaries, for example. They're also pretty good at taking a text and making it less formal or making it more formal. Like these kind of operations, they're really good at. And if you write a lot, which as a simple marketing guy I happen to do, this is very helpful. But also if you don't do marketing, if you're writing code, again, these things can be helpful. They can do bad things, they can reinforce bad habits. You need to be there and pay attention. But there are a lot of opportunities, and that's just a fact. And an interesting one that actually came up in my previous presentation, I never really thought about, is of course accessibility. There are a lot of people who have, well, limitations in how they interact with technology, and the opportunities that you can get using AI, a voice interface, for example, for people who have eyesight problems, or the other way around, for maybe tactile interfaces and other stuff, are absolutely huge. So you probably cannot imagine how people with disabilities can profit from, the opportunities around artificial intelligence the coming years. And for that alone, I think it is even unethical to basically say, look, we want to stop this AI research, which is what some people have claimed or advocated for. So there's a ton of good stuff for normal day-to-day work, or for, well, research, like the previous talk, right, was about using AI in biological research and medicine research. Again, this stuff, yeah, I think we have as a society to move on that and benefit from it. But again, there are all these problems, right? And by the way, if anybody has any other ideas, I'd love to hear them. And of course, now I have to swipe through all of this again. That's really great. I'll learn. So, as an example, just a simple example, this is something we've done in Nextcloud. We have like large language model integrations, and they can summarize email threads so that you can save the time reading through them. And in our upcoming release, keep it to yourself. It's not public yet, but we're going to use this also in our chat application, so you can have these long chat sessions. I don't know about you, I have some chat rooms open with 1,000 unread messages. I really, really dread having to read up to them. Having a summary of it is something I really look forward to. I might or might not have waited until this feature was implemented until now, so that I can then don't actually have to read up on these. So another one, that's thread summary. Another example is like these text operations. Let me see how I can have this play. Yeah, exactly. So we have Nextcloud Text. It's our built-in, rich text editor. You can select a piece of text. You can choose some operations, let it summarize, given the free prompt, create a headline, these kind of things. So just some examples of what you can do with this. Another one is, of course, the well-known, let's generate an image. But there's a lot of data analysis stuff out there as well. I personally get quite excited when I see people, even though I never use spreadsheets, honestly. But when I see these demos of like, there's a spreadsheet with a ton of data, you select the financial data and you say, hey, what is the trend? And then, AI generated graphs come up and you say, what is the cause of this trend? And it can actually go in and say, well, that comes from this city out of this big data set. Like these kind of things are crazy. And I think, this will revolutionize to some degree a lot of the work that we do. And I think in some ways it can also give access to, like Insight, for example, that is now limited to a bunch of, well-paid consultants at a big consulting firm. And, suddenly, like, normal people can get access to this stuff too, right? I don't have time to dive deep into these complicated things. But with AI, if you can just say, what is the trend here and why is that, it can be really helpful. Again, it sometimes hallucinates, it makes stuff up, but it still can be super helpful. So, yeah, I think this is really cool. We are working on a couple of things in this area as well, but I don't have anything to show yet, but there are definitely other projects that are doing really, fascinating stuff with, again, open source models, which I think is important. So, as I said again, I think we need AI. We need to do things with AI as society. But if we leave it to a couple of big tech companies, this isn't going to go great. This is going to be just another way for them to lock us in, to extract money. And, well, honestly, they're also not innovating a lot, given the amount of money that they get, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, smaller companies is usually where most of the interesting stuff happens, and that is the case as much with AI as anywhere else. So we need more open AI, open source technologies. So how can we do this? Now, at Nextcloud, we want to offer AI, as I've shown a couple of examples already, to make people's lives easier. But as I've told you earlier, we were doing already AI stuff, but we had never really thought much about consequences. And then someday, there was still before ChatGPT came a new feature, which was face and object recognition. Now, this was really cool, but it required a really big neural network. This wasn't something you could just run on your Nextcloud server and then it would learn how to recognize faces by itself. This was a pre-trained model. But it was an open source model. It was pre-trained on freely available data. It was big. It was a gigabyte. We had never really shipped apps with Nextcloud that were that big, but we even re-architectured parts of Nextcloud to make it possible to ship it, and we shipped this as well. And then came ChatGPT, and we started saying to each other, like, hey, we need to do something with this. We need to integrate this. But then at the same time, suddenly it's no longer open source. It's a web service from an American company, which for a lot of Europeans or, well, people basically anywhere but the US means shipping the data overseas. And even in the US, right, do we trust OpenAI with our data? So we said we can't just go and do this. We need to think a bit more about this. So we had a bunch of discussions, and one of the people very central to this was Daphne, who, as I said, will give a talk about these things tomorrow. And we came up with a concept we call ethical AI. I don't want to make it too pretentious, it's just our approach to AI. And so what we've tried to do is to create a score for different type of AI integrations. It's red, orange, yellow, green, as you can see. So the question that we ask for each AI integration is the code open source? Is the model available? And is the training data available? And if all three are available, it's green. If two of the three are available, it's yellow. One is available, orange, and none of them is red. So ChatGPT would be red. Our on-premises trained stuff that we had before already was all green. But of course, there are a lot of things where the model might be available, and you can run it wherever you want, but the data it is trained on is secret or proprietary or licensed, etc. Right? There are often limitations with this. So we want to make sure that when people enable such a feature, they can see, what the consequences are. And they can see, so that we put this in our app store, and the developer of such an app then has to say, like, hey, this is, let's say, orange, and it's orange because, the model can be run wherever you want, but the training data is not available, for example, these kind of things. So the other thing that we wanted to make sure of is that there's actually choice. So the way we implemented the AI features is that we made it possible for each of the features to choose between different models. So you can have ChatGPT or a locally running model, face recognition, different models, speech to text, different models, etc. And this way, again, you can use maybe a model that has a heavy load on your server, or you use a remote model, and with the rating, the balance, what you should be, if it's a good idea to hand over your data to this model or not, basically. So that was our approach, has been our approach, and still is. So we want to make it possible to connect to Delhi, to ChatGPT, and other remote services, but at the same time, we want to make sure there are choice and that there's transparency. Because I think with that, at least as a user, you have a way to make an informed choice. And most of our effort goes into, honestly, the local technologies, because we are a, on-premise company community. So here are some of the models that are currently working with Nextcloud. There's a ton more of these. We're using localai.io, if you want to look it up, among other things. What they've basically done is they made a thing, I don't know how you call it, that runs all these different models and features an API that is very similar to the OpenAI ChatGPT API and the DALL-E API, etc., so that they're almost drop-in replacements. You just need to change the URL and add a different token, etc. So yeah, through this mechanism, basically any of you, if you have a bit of experience running a server, which I know that's actually a big thing, but if you do, then it's quite easy to get all of this stuff up and running. We have a whole Docker mechanism, so it's essentially running the Nextcloud all in one Docker container, running a local AI container, putting I think it's a JSON file or such in a magic location so that you tell it what models to download, and then it'll simply download the models automatically from GitHub, and it'll run, and you'll be able to fire requests and data. Did you have a question?
Yeah, for this to be usable
Yeah.
at like a reasonable performance,
Mm-hmm.
you have like GPU requirements on your Nextcloud servers?
Yeah, so usually you get a choice of models. There's the tiny, small, medium, and large model. The large model requires pretty hefty CPU or GPU resources. So local AI supports GPU acceleration, and yeah, you kind of need a GPU, and unfortunately it's got to be NVIDIA, and that's definitely not the cheapest, and they know it, so they are, price gouging at the moment like crazy. But the difference is huge. Like we were running at some point speech to text on our server. So we have this built into our video calling application. And what do you do with speech to text in a video call? Well, you record the call and then you get a transcript of it. Really cool. But it would take like 20 minutes. That was on the CPU. And it's practically instant on the GPU, just like, I don't know, 3 seconds or something. And yeah, so the difference is absolutely massive. So running this privately, locally is, yeah, it's quite a thing. And even for a company, right? Because just buying a couple of 10K each GPUs, it's not a joke, even as a company, to invest in that, compared to just renting, a couple of servers, right? I mean, then you're talking about, if you even buy them and put them in your own data center, that's thousands, not immediately tens or hundreds of thousands. So it's hefty. But there are lighter models that are, for example, summarizing a text. You don't need, all of ChatGPT, right? You don't need a 7 billion, 12 billion parameter model just to summarize a text. The smaller ones do a pretty okay job. Just don't ask them questions about stuff because they'll make up stuff. So it's, pros and cons. And another answer to this, I personally believe that also AI as a service has a place. Yeah, again, within the choice, but there are already a bunch of companies, especially in the US here, offering basically running one of these open source models as a service. Yeah, and what we're trying to do is make it possible for you as a company or as an individual to hook into that, and you pay them by the token, what I've seen from most of these models, and they are, well, looking at the prices of ChatGPT and what Microsoft and Google are charging, like 20, 30 bucks per user per month. These models, they charge like, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 cents for 1 million tokens. That's kind of simplified 1 million words. That's a lot of summaries to do. Like, I don't want to read 1 million words every week. I don't think I can. So they're actually quite cheap. And of course, you're back to the concern of like you're handing your data over to somebody else. But I very much prefer thousands of little companies running different open source models as a service. So I can pick one that I kind of trust, maybe even in the city where you live, or in a place where you can go and look them in the eye and decide whether you trust them, versus again one big company offering this as a service to everyone. Yeah, so it's already, I think, AI as a service is already tons and tons better than having it all centralized at Microsoft, Google, and 5 other big tech companies. So I think this is already, quite a step up. And as I said, we're working really hard at Nextcloud to make sure that this is supported and you can, enter a URL and all this stuff. So yeah, I wanted to give a couple of examples here, but before I go into that, I mean, if there are more questions, then you can shoot any time. Yes.
So given that Nextcloud is quite often a single tenant installation with multiple users and multiple applications, how do you handle contention, say if you have one GPU, but you have a bunch of different models, a bunch of different applications?
Right, so the question is, how do you deal with multiple users trying to get access to that GPU, etc., on a single system. So there is in the settings, I mean, I can't show it, I don't have it right here by hand, but there are throttling mechanisms, so you can limit the number of tokens or images generated that a user can do. It's a rolling window of 30 days, I think, where you can say, okay, each user can only do so many tokens. So you can that way throttle, which for a really big installation especially is absolutely necessary, of course. And for a smaller one, I mean, yeah, if all 20 users on your private Nextcloud server with one small GPU all fire up a request at the same time, then, you know, patience is the only answer, I think. That's, yeah, not much you can do about that part. So I already talked at the beginning, like we've been doing various AI-ish, or at least neural network thingies for years, so the suspicious login detection is on here. But now we have, you know, the text generation, the call transcripts, face recognition, image generation, the smart inbox, of course. Yeah, dictation, translation, so you can select a chat message in Nextcloud Talk and have it be translated. So in a ton of places we already have integrated this, and I'm going to give a couple of nice examples. This is the suspicious login detection. Again, this is already 3 or 4 years old. And I mean, in the settings you can look at stuff that I don't understand, and probably most of you don't, but hey, it looks kind of pretty. And it's green, as I said before, and that's nice. Then we have email, we have the smart inbox, which is also just fully running on your system. The face and object recognition I talked about earlier, because the whole model is open source, the data that it's trained on is open. Yeah, this is all green, which I think is nice. It can even recognize music genres, but the problem with this is that the music it is trained on, I think it comes from Spotify, which, you know, all this music is of course licensed, so it is not a fully green service in that regard. Now you might wonder, why do I care what something is trained on? The thing is, if you have the original training data, you or, well, somebody with a ton of GPUs can retrain or optimize the model, which, given the enormous power resources of these models, can be quite helpful to make them more efficient. With new technologies, these models are constantly getting more efficient, and being able to retrain these models in the future is really important, I think, well, just to keep our planet from completely burning up, honestly. You had a question? I think it does that already, the music app. Yeah, so this is purely the genre recognition, but it has integration with the database. Yeah. So yeah, last year we introduced a ton of new things. We used a lot of new models. I'm trying to figure out what screenshot this is showing. Okay, yeah, this is a call transcript recording. I already talked about this, which can run on your server, right, the speech to text. So this one is then using Replicate with Whisper, which is, well, that should not be green. Well, there is an on-prem version, so I guess that one is green. Yeah, also you have these simple things, right? For example, there is a background blur and, like recognition of this. That's a huge JavaScript blob. I think it was developed by Google. But it is trained on open data. It runs, well, actually in your browser. And so at least it's green in that regard. We had to translate that I already mentioned. I'm going to try. The initial version was based on DeepL. And DeepL is pretty good, but it is, of course, not open source. So now we actually made a translation model based on an open corpus from, I think, a Finnish university. The Opus corpus. Sorry, some of you might know more about this than I do, so please forgive me. But that one is completely open source. And, well, you can see some German happening, and then it getting translated to something readable. And that is completely green, which I think is cool. And, of course, then there are all the LLMs. So I already showed earlier, that you can select a piece of text and run a number of operations. But last year we also introduced, the Nextcloud Assistant basically. So based on large language models, can be any of them. It's pluggable, as I said, open source, of course, and self-hosted. And so this essentially has on the top a button that brings up the assistant, and then you can ask the assistant questions. give it a free prompt. It'll then fire up the request. Now, we have a run in the background for those running this on a Raspberry Pi, because they will need some hours probably to get a response. But if you have a fast system, of course, this then goes away after half a second and you're back to, having the answer. And the nice thing is, by the way, you can, of course, have Nextcloud on a Raspberry Pi, but then have another system next to it which runs the LLM, right? It doesn't have to be on the same computer. Especially if you're running in a big data center, this is obviously pretty important. But you can have a couple of systems that have like GPUs and a couple of systems that have GPU and memory and a CPU and memory, and then they run Nextcloud and the other systems run the models there. So it's designed to scale the way we've implemented it. So yeah, I have some examples here which are all fairly obvious. So what we did is we also tried to integrate this assistant. I already showed you earlier. There's a nice video of it, which I should try to show. So I already showed you this, the integration in Nextcloud Text. That's, I think, really cool. We have then the summary in Nextcloud Mail, which I also already showed. We have it in Talk, with the Talk transcript, as well as the translations. It can also generate images and stuff. And yeah, those cats are not looking great, but we all know the problems with this stuff. We also built a chatbot. This chatbot is actually a completely self-contained app. It's a very small model, so you will not get an answer like that, I'm afraid. I asked the bot some stuff and it's not great. But we want to make this pluggable as well, so you can put a slightly better LLM behind it. So yeah, that's the stuff that's currently today. Like if you download Nextcloud, all this stuff you can have. This is already available for like half a year or more, depending on what version you are running. And so while there is a release coming soon, I already talked a bit. I want to talk a little bit about what's coming, basically. So a big thing we're working on now is to enable a lot of these AI as a service models. So we are talking to tons of companies to try and integrate their AI as a service into Nextcloud, so that you as user can choose them. As I said, I think this is really important to have this. Another one of them is Aleph Alpha. That's a German one. I've heard it's not particularly good, but it's in Germany. The French also have a model, I think, Mistral. I don't know if that's any good. We worked on the administrator tool, so this was actually asked earlier by the gentleman there. Can you throttle it? Well, yes, you can. So you can put a user quota in here. And as I said, this is rolling. So, basically every day you get 1/30 of your quota back if you've used it all up in one day. We worked on the UI. I already showed, I think, earlier, like when you send the request, you have then the option to run in the background. The earlier versions didn't allow you to do that. So then you either had to wait or, have it come later. So one cool thing that we're coming with is actually collaboration with a German state. We are building a context-aware Nextcloud assistant. So basically you have the option with a large language model to give it more context about the request that you put out. I'll go into the details in a few minutes, but what this basically allows you to do is to ask questions about your own documents, about your chats, about your emails. So in theory you can say, hey, what is in our company, like how should I submit a expense report? And because that's in the documentation, it'll just tell you how to do it. Or, you can ask like, hey, there's a customer with this question, what do we typically say about that? Or you can say, hey, what are the tasks that Gary emailed me about last week? Like these kind of things will be possible, or are possible with this. And that's really cool. So how this works, and I mean, I have a couple of things here that I don't understand, especially the local vector database. But basically it runs as a microservice. It needs to index all your data, which goes into that vector database. But it can work with an internal LLM or an external one. So you can have this all completely on-prem, or you can send it over to OpenAI, or anything in between. Yeah, and then it gives you like these answers. Let me give a couple of examples. That's maybe better. So, one thing is like, can you give a summary of how we organize events? Like at Nextcloud, we organize a lot of them. There's a ton of documentation. And so this will then give, a reasonable answer. And then there's the thing of mail, right? Can you summarize the requests I got over the last week from a colleague? And it'll try to, give you an idea of these. Yeah, again, documentation is a typical example, but it can read all your documents, right? So anything in your documents, in your chats, it should be able to answer questions about. So that's kind of the latest stuff we've been working on. This is all coming out, well, soon. There's already a tech demo available for all of it. Again, we do everything in the open anyway, so you can just download it, run it, and I'm calling it tech demo. It works fine, but it's not fully formally released yet. We have a release coming up, Nextcloud Hub 8. There's a bunch of improvements to all of this in there as well. Again, more UI improvements. Again, more model supported, more AI as a service, etc. Yeah, you should definitely go play with it. It's really cool. So this context chat then is kind of the biggest thing that we're working on, I think. But this is kind of our approach to AI. I'd love to hear thoughts, questions, maybe input and ideas, things we can do better. Yeah, open source transparency. I think that this is the way we should try and do AI altogether, but maybe you disagree. I'm sure OpenAI does. They've locked everything down lately, so yeah. And again, I think that this is important to have these options. By the way, there's the OSI. They are working on a kind of a standard for ethical AI, and it's fairly similar to what we've come up with, which I think shows we're kind of in the right direction. I hope. You can get involved in this. I have a URL here for you. Yeah, that's kind of a community AI standard, so for open source to kind of adhere to. And I think it's really good to have some things written down, because this field is moving really, really fast, and having a common definition of what is the right way of doing AI, I think is important. So I welcome this. So as I said, Daphne, she will be talking about the ethical challenges around AI, go way deeper into those ethical challenges. Very little about Nextcloud, in case you're done with that. Really go there. If you find this interesting, go to her talk. It's way better. She knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. I have another colleague who will be giving a talk for those of you who actually want to dive into Nextcloud, especially if you want to build an app. Go to Camilla's talk. Yeah, that's happening on Saturday as well. More of a workshop. I think, well, at least, I think Technic hits a talk, but she goes into more of the technical side of things. That's it. Any input? Any more thoughts? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can put up your hand, I'll try to make sure everybody gets a chance here. I see we have one question over here, sir.
Sure. So, for the local language models, you mentioned the GPUs can help a lot. And you said it was NVIDIA only for the moment. Is there any ongoing effort in getting AMD or Intel? Because they both got
Sorry,
some.
could you speak a little?
Okay, sorry. You mentioned that the GPUs are NVIDIA right now only. And is there ongoing effort for AMD and Intel? Because both of those have AI accelerators based on open source drivers, which would be definitely nicer.
Yeah, so we leave most of this to the underlying stack, basically. I think local AI, they support, so it depends on the model, I think, and the software that's running it. There are definitely like other models that run on other hardware than NVIDIA. It's just, NVIDIA has really everything in a very tight grasp at the moment. Yeah, it's not great. Again, it's another example, like if you look at the prices, it's just, well, the stock value is going up like a rocket, because, I mean, they just got everybody completely under control, and it just shows you what the problem it is. If we, as a community, don't, we just let them go do what they want, those big companies, right? They'll just squeeze and they'll stop innovation. I mean, OpenAI is already trying to lobby everyone and everywhere to put in a lot of legislation. So yeah, sorry, more questions before I keep rambling on. Seems to be it then. Okay. Thanks a lot. And look us up at the booth. We have a stand if you have more questions or about AI or Nextcloud or anything else. All right.